Sarah Ludeman couldn't stop crying. All through lunch, she was slumped over a table, telling her friends that her boyfriend had been hanging out with his ex, Rachel Wade. Her boyfriend, Josh Camacho, kept saying that she was the only one for over a year, but that day she found out that was a lie. And all morning, Rachel had been texting Sarah, saying that Josh was with her again. And Sarah's friends kept telling her to forget about Josh, and that she deserved better. But Josh was her very first boyfriend, and her whole life, so she couldn't give up on it. And the events that would play out would change lives forever. Rachel and Sarah grew up a few blocks away from each other in Pinellas Park, Florida, but they didn't know each other. Rachel was named biggest flirt in her high school yearbook and was very experienced with guys. But for some reason, Josh had a serious hold on her. Sarah, on the other hand, was a late bloomer. She made straight A's, she loved animals, she had dreams of becoming a veterinarian, and she was a daddy's girl. Her parents called her their miracle baby because she was conceived after 16 years of trying. Rachel was 19. She had her GED and she was independent. She had her own car, her own apartment, and a full-time job at Applebee's. During her sophomore year, Rachel ran away about 14 times, and she would sleep in strangers' cars or in the lounge chairs at apartment pools. Her parents took her to counseling, hoping that would help, but one night while Rachel and her mother were having an argument, Rachel opened a kitchen drawer and pulled out a Pampered Chef knife. She didn't point it at her mother, but she took it and ran into the bathroom. And Rachel had been a chronic runaway and had been on her own since she was 15. At 15, she moved in with a boyfriend and she dropped out of school a year later. And that relationship involved a lot of drama and a lot of screaming. Rachel was in elementary school when Josh Camacho and his family moved to Florida from the Dominican Republic. His father was from New York and his mother was from the Dominican Republic. A few years later, Rachel ran into Josh at a party. It had been years since she'd seen him and she was smitten. He was no longer the boy that she remembered. Josh was only about 5'5", but he had the confidence of someone much larger. And for months they dated on and off, but she knew that he was seeing other girls, and he eventually would start to sleep over and sponge off of her. He didn't have a job or a car, and Rachel had gotten too attached. While Josh was dating Rachel, he met Sarah Ludeman while working at Chick-fil-A, and he came out of the back and he waved at Sarah. This was a big deal to her because no one had ever really flirted with Sarah, so she was blown away that this guy was interested in her. From the beginning of the relationship, Sarah's parents didn't like Josh. He had this bad boy attitude that they didn't want around their daughter, but that's one of the main things that attracted Sarah to him. Her father called him the rat and told Sarah that Josh was no good. And at the same time, unbeknownst to Sarah and Rachel, Josh was also in a relationship with a third girl that he had gotten pregnant. He considered all three of them friends with benefits. He started dating Sarah before the baby was even born. He would spend time with the baby, but he didn't provide any financial support. The crazy thing is that he couldn't financially support his child, but at the same time, the girls were all buying him clothes and shoes and even paying his cell phone bill. He was able to spend time with all three of them because their schedules were so different. Sarah had an 11 o'clock curfew, and his child's mother, Erin, had 2 jobs and was only available late at night. And as I mentioned earlier, Rachel had her own apartment. Even though Josh and Sarah had flirted throughout the summer, once school started back in the fall, he pretty much ignored her. In November, they were finally a couple, but he wouldn't hold her hand or walk with her. But when they were alone, things were different, and he was all over her. Josh was Sarah's first boyfriend, her first kiss, her first everything. And according to Sarah, he made her feel beautiful and important. And what girl doesn't want to feel beautiful? Her friends, on the other hand, were worried because she started dressing differently. Even though they lived in Florida, Josh made sure that she always had on pants. And Sarah was the type of person that loved to wear shorts, and she would even wear them in the wintertime. But Josh didn't want any other guys to see her legs, and he had also started telling her who she could hang out with and who she could talk to. Sarah was starting to lose herself because of the fear of losing him. he became an obsession. Because Sarah saw Josh as tough and streetwise, she was trying to take on that persona. On her phone were pictures of Josh smoking weed and waving a gun. She had even begged her father for a pit bull, but he told her, "You gotta be joking." Since her father knew that he couldn't keep Sarah away from Josh, and to keep an eye on him, he would invite Josh over for dinner and he would take him to ball games. Her father told Josh to not let anything happen to Sarah. She was a good girl that had never been in trouble, but that was about to change. A few months after Rachel and Josh started dating, she saw a picture on MySpace of Josh with a tall blonde girl, and the name tagged on the picture said Sarah Ludeman. The picture was of her and Josh on a trip to New York. Rachel was devastated, so she wrote a message to Josh on her MySpace blog. In the post, she mentioned how he kept cheating on her and that she deserved better. And Sarah posted a comment saying that Josh had found better. And Rachel couldn't take it anymore, so she found Sarah's number and she started calling and leaving nasty voicemails.
Please tell me, Sarah, why you would be a dumb enough to put a brand new picture of you and Josh at the beach. Seriously, I told you to watch your back and not to chill with him. Now your ass is mine, and I'm guaranteeing you I'm no you. I swear on my life. It's so funny how you talk. You keep playing games. You're a pathetic little bitch, and you're a little girl. Honestly, what do you have that's going for you that Josh wants you over me for? I got a job, have my own place. Seriously? He could get anything he wants from me. Any thing, not to mention that I look probably 10 times better than you. And you run your mouth. I'm telling you now, keep with me, Sarah. Dumb, psychotic little bitches. And I'm telling you now, I'm going to show you psycho. Keep with me. You're with the wrong person and with the one thing that I care about. So keep going, Sarah. Play your game, because I'm going to teach you how to grow up real quick.
Sarah started to feel that she wasn't worthy of Josh because she didn't have a job or a car like Rachel. How could she even compete? Plus, she still had a curfew. Rachel was much prettier, she thought, and Sarah had already given her first everything to Josh, so if he didn't want her anymore, who would? In the first 6 months of the relationship, the police spoke with Sarah about 6 times because of the arguments that she and Josh would have out in public. Josh had also punched her in the face, but she didn't press charges. And she also got into a verbal argument with the mother of his child. Both Sarah and Rachel's friends begged them to end their relationship with Josh, but they didn't listen. Sarah had even lost 30 pounds and was losing herself in Josh, but she just wasn't willing to let him go. Even though Rachel had been sending messages for months, it was Sarah who took the fight offline. She and her friends would go to Applebee's and trip Rachel up while she was carrying beer, or they would complain that she had spit in their food. They would follow her around, and they even bumped into her car. They also sang the song Girl Fight by Brooke Valentine during karaoke. The drama wasn't confined to Applebee's, though. It spread to a movie theater, in the parking lot of a Taco Bell, and at a pizza restaurant where one of their friends worked. Sarah had also driven by Rachel's apartment and shouted, "Come fight me." Sarah told police that Rachel called her 20 times in 2 hours, threatening her. And when the cops talked to Rachel, she told them that Sarah had also sent her nasty emails. But since they hadn't thrown a punch or drawn a weapon, the police let it go. And Sarah's father thought that it would blow over, and Rachel's mother said, "Just don't let it get to you." But sadly, the parents didn't know how bad things had gotten and that it was only going to get much worse. On April 14th in 2009, when Sarah's father picked her up from school, her eyes were swollen and she had been crying every day for weeks. Her father tried to hug her, but she would just pull away from him. When she got home, she immediately logged onto MySpace and she saw Rachel's latest post that said, "Loving my boo." After she read that, she started to text Josh, but he wasn't responding. And after several hours with no reply, he finally responded with, "Bring the movies." So Sarah drives to Josh's sister's house, but before she left, she updated her MySpace with, "I love you, baby." That same night, Rachel was also at home waiting for Josh. He had sent her a text asking to see her that night, but a little while later, he sent another message canceling their plans, and Rachel assumed that Sarah was the reason. So she then sends him a text that said, "Now I know why you're not talking to me. It's because you have her." And Josh responded with, "That's right, I don't like you anymore. Why don't you go home?" And Rachel responded with, "No, I'll wait for her to go home." As she was leaving her apartment for Javier's, which is a friend of hers, she stopped to grab a knife from the kitchen drawer. She was afraid that Sarah and her friends would show up again and she wouldn't have a way to defend herself. Rachel was 5'4" and 110 pounds, while Sarah was 5'9" and 166 pounds. She assumed that they wouldn't attack her if they saw the knife. Also around this time, Sarah's father sent her a text about her 11 o'clock curfew, and it ticked her off. She was now worried that Rachel would swoop in as soon as she went home. So just after midnight, Sarah left Josh's to go back home, but as she was leaving, Josh's sister and her friend asked for a ride to McDonald's. On the way, Sarah saw a friend at a stop sign, and they said, "Guess who I just saw?" Her friend said, "Rachel." So Sarah arrived at Javier's house, and she saw Rachel outside talking to him. And within a matter of seconds, Rachel grabbed the knife and approached the driver's side of the minivan, which is what Sarah was driving. So Sarah left the keys in the ignition with the engine running, and she jumped out of the driver's seat in her flip-flops, and she didn't even close the door. By this time, her friends realized what was going on, and Sarah had jumped out of the car and grabbed Rachel's hair. She punched Rachel in the head a few times, and Rachel's arms were just flying all over the place. But after only a few seconds, the fighting stopped. Sarah was bleeding, and she walked back to the minivan and collapsed. Rachel walked back to Javier's house and tossed the knife onto a neighbor's roof. Afterwards, Javier said that Rachel had a blank look on her face, and it didn't look like she was there with them. Sarah had been once in the shoulder and once in the chest, and the chest wound penetrated her heart. So Sarah walked away clutching her chest, and then she collapsed in the driver's seat, and she started looking for her phone so that she could call Josh, and she told Josh that it hurts. Josh took off and ran 2 blocks to Sarah's house and told her father that she had been in a fight, and they both found her lying in the street in a pool of blood with a very weak pulse. So he and Josh drove to the hospital, where doctors worked hard to save Sarah, but sadly she was pronounced dead at 2:29 in the morning. Sarah's dad told Josh that he was going to go see Sarah in the room and that he ought to come, but Josh said, "No, I can't see her like that." Her father told him that he was the reason that she was like that. Rachel was later arrested and charged with murder in the 2nd degree, and Sarah's funeral was a month before prom. Rachel's attorney said that while Josh was not legally responsible in the crime, he was ethically culpable. And that makes me think of the Avis Banks Carla Hughes case. I'll link to that video for you. On December the 3rd, Rachel was sentenced to 27 years in prison. And in a March 2011 interview she did with ABC News, she said that social media played a major part in this case. Social media gives people the ability to say whatever they want with very little consequence. Rachel also said that she wishes that she had sat down and talked with Sarah, and that both of them would have been smart enough to just walk away and realized that they deserved better. Young males tend to, while committing other crimes like robbing a store or selling drugs, but with females, murder is personal. Females are more likely to kill family members over a relationship. Some examples of this are Erin Caffey, Sarah Johnson, Sierra Halseth, Tyler Witt, and Linda Pedrosa. And once they feel like they belong to someone or that someone belongs to them, it comes down to ownership, and the love triangle turns into a property dispute. And since the trial, Josh has avoided reporters, and the only time he spoke publicly was during Rachel's trial. He wasn't allowed at Sarah's funeral, and he's never visited nor written to Rachel.